Hello, Aaron here. In this video I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks for shooting motorsport photography. Now I'm going to kind of segment this up into kind of a few main areas. First main area being camera equipment and kind of what you need to aim for, setting up your camera, and then techniques for shooting motorsport photography, and then the last bit will kind of be some kind of maybe tips or tricks that kind of don't fall into any of them. So let's get to it. Now, starting out, a lot of people are probably going to tell you that you need to kind of aim for the most expensive camera possible and like the highest end lenses, when that just isn't true. Yes, it would be lovely to have a 1DX or a 400mm f4, but realistically, for starting out, that's really not going to make sense. But this shot here was taken with a Canon 350D and a 100 to 300mm lens, which this image is fine. It looked good. In my portfolio, it's alongside images taken on a 70 a few months ago, and it looks fine. So anyone telling you need an expensive camera is wrong. Just don't listen to them. But really, as long as you're getting a DSLR, the body's fine, but lenses do play a lot more in kind of image quality, really. Which I'll link a thing in the bottom, which is I think it's from Digital Rev, where they kind of compare a kind of a cheap body with a high-end L series lens compared to a high-end body like a 1DX that has a cheaper Sigma lens on it, and they show that the cheaper body with the high-end lens outperforms it just because the glass quality is a lot better. Now for motorsport, it's kind of hard to say what lens you'll need, because at places like Cadwell Park, where it's not a major track, you're still very close to the edge of the track, I've been able to get away with using a 100mm focal length for most bits of Cadwell. Parts of it I need a bit more reach, but for the most part, 100mm is kind of fine. But then other places like Brands Hatch or Snetterton, where they're a bit more high end, they kind of host some more prestigious events. You're a bit further away because of the safety and the runoff areas, where really a 300mm lens plus is going to serve you better. So really, as long as you're getting a lens that can go up to 300mm, you're going to be fine. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is setting up the camera, which you've got a few different options with this. First option, which is what I'd recommend if you're starting out, is going for shutter priority, where you just set the shutter speed and you let the camera decide the rest. This is quite good if you're starting out, because it means you can focus on the shutter speed, the camera will do the rest, and you can just focus on getting the techniques right and kind of experimenting with the different shutter speeds. Now the other thing you can do to set up is going fully manual, which is where you're controlling the shutter speed and the aperture, which is something I definitely recommend when you're getting a lot more comfortable with it and you kind of want to experiment a bit more with like the depth of field and the amount of blur in an image. Because a shallower aperture creates more depth of field, whereas a wider aperture introduces less depth of field. Now really, I'd recommend you want like about f8 to f10 to start out with, because at the longer focal lengths, even f4 is going to be a very shallow depth of field, which that'll make your job of focusing a lot more difficult. The next thing you'll want to set up is the focusing mode. Now really, you definitely want AI Servo. Now what AI Servo does is it is a continuous focus, because whereas if maybe you've used a compact camera and you've tried to take a picture, it will lock the focus, it will beep telling you it's locked onto focus. Now you don't want that for motorsport photography, because in most cases the subject is going to be a different amount of distance away from you depending on where you're shooting. So really, IA Servo will mean that you can be like shooting them off when they're like further away, And keep focusing as they come past you, and then keep focusing as they move away. Because I think all DSLRs will do this. Higher end ones will kind of give you like tracking speed, which isn't really important, but as long as you can do AI servo, you can focus well. The other thing to consider is back button focusing, which is another important thing, because this means you can focus with a button on the back of the camera. Now most kind of prosumer to high-end cameras will have a dedicated button for this, with AF on, not on Canon, and you can usually remap it on lower end cameras to the exposure lock button, since no one really uses that anymore. It's all digital, so you can like adjust the exposure whenever. But really, that's quite useful because it means you can take the focusing off the shutter button, which is quite useful because it means if you found a focusing, you found that it's working because the subject's going across the same point every single time, you can keep the focus locked and just worry about taking pictures. I do believe that is all the setup, so now let's move on to some techniques. Now, like this shot here, this is a panning shot. This is where, rather than just sitting there with the camera, releasing the shutter, taking the picture, we're going to follow with the subject. So the background is blurred, but the subject will remain sharp and also the wheels. Now, personally, I'd recommend starting somewhere around 300th, 250th of a second for a panning shot. I'd also say don't go to the fastest bit of a track where they're going like 150 miles an hour, because you will struggle and you will have a bad time. So really, you probably want to go on the corner, especially for motorbikes. It just makes for an interesting image with them leaning over, and start at 250 of a second, kind of get comfy with it, slow it down a bit until you're kind of getting to the stage where you're getting an image that you like. It's like this image here, this was done at 1/125th of a second. The wheels are blurred in such a way that they look nearly invisible. Background's blurred and you're getting a lot of isolation on the subject. And it just makes for a good image, really. The next technique really is going to be using a monopod, which I personally have never got on with a monopod, but a lot of motorsport photographers swear by them and find them very useful. Whereas this one is where you'll use a faster shutter speed, because they're coming at you head on, so a slower shutter speed is going to make no real difference. You might notice a bit in the wheels, but not a lot, because you want to freeze the motion, you want to get them sharp, because they're going to be moving towards you. So that's obviously where AI servo would come in useful, so it continues to focus as they're coming towards you. And yeah, that is very important. And I think techniques, really, there isn't really a lot apart from panning and kind of a head-on shot. Really, it's just general photography. Was it holding the camera and whatnot? Now, to kind of close up, I'm going to give some other advice and tricks, which a lot of motorsport venues you will probably find that you're either behind a fence or you're kind of far away from the subject. Now, what you can do to combat this, especially with a fence, is use a wide aperture, so like a very low depth of field. Now what to do, if you get close enough to the fence and shoot through it, it will be almost as if the fence is invisible, which I've kind of strayed away from this recently, because I find that because I want to use a shallower aperture to get a better depth of field, you kind of see the fence and it kind of affects the image, and I found that it also plays with the autofocus a bit. But your mind might vary with that. But if you use a wide aperture, get close enough to the fence, you can pretty much make the fence invisible, which is quite useful for a lot of tracks like Brands Hatch and Snetterton, where there are quite high fences for safety reasons, whereas obviously that wouldn't be an issue at Cadwell Park. So I think the vast majority of it, you're not even behind a fence, you're just up to like a waist high fence, really. And I think some other advice would be a step, like small step ladder would be quite useful, especially for certain parts of tracks, because certain part of tracks are kind of, the fence is only about like a person high. So really, if you had a step, you can just shoot on the fence. You don't have to worry about shooting through a fence. Now I think this, I totally forgot about this, but this is kind of related to technique, but a high motor drive can help. It really isn't necessary, but it will be helpful, where you can shoot a lot of images in succession, which really, if you talk to anyone who shot film, they'll kind of say, oh, motor drive, it's just the lazy people, because obviously they wouldn't have had that, and even if they did, they wouldn't have wanted to use it. Like, taking 36 photos in a few seconds, that would be very bad, and that would be a whole roll of film wasted. But nowadays, in the day of digital, it can be useful. Mainly because it means the more images you can take, the better chances you have of getting that good shots. Like, for example, I think even nowadays, about 90%, 80% of the images I'm taking are bad ones. But I guess the saying is, if you throw enough crap at the wall, some of it's going to stick. So I guess that's good. Just keep shooting, go out there, and keep going at it until you get the shot you like, really. So I hope that this was all useful. Maybe leave a comment if there's anything I forgot, and maybe leave a comment if you have any feedback, and maybe like it if you found it useful.